This summer, I decided to take a break from the usually heavy stuff that I tend to read to read a wholesome classic work of children's literature. So I read this summer The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So this cover doesn't tell you much, but this is the edition I read it in. This was published back in 1911. It's quite old by this point. I assume that if you haven't at least heard of The Secret Garden, that you've probably read it, or perhaps seen one of the film adaptations. But The Secret Garden is very wholesome, a very wholesome story, very much sort of a book of vibes more than plot. The characters are lovely, and it's a work of children's literature, right? So it has that tone. But what kind of leaps out to me about The Secret Garden when I stop and I think about it is how, all of that notwithstanding, that it's for kids, that it is very wholesome in tone and has very wholesome characters, it's rooted in a lot of kind of dark themes, or a lot of kind of dark themes hang over the story that we read in this book. So for those who aren't familiar with the story of The Secret Garden, it's about this young girl named Mary who is 10 years old in this book. She's been raised by her fabulously wealthy parents in India, in British-controlled India. This book, again, was published in 1911, and it probably takes place somewhere roughly around that era, late 19th, early 20th century. So when India was still under the control of the British Empire. And Mary is profoundly neglected by her parents. I said a minute ago that they raised her. They, of course, did not raise her. She was raised by servants of her parents, basically. And even the servants didn't really care about her all that much. But her parents are profoundly neglectful. Her father, it's suggested, is just consumed by his work. Her mother is consumed with her own beauty and with partying and with other men who aren't her husband. That's another thing I found really surprising about The Secret Garden is it was published in 1911 when at least ostensibly very conservative, repressive, Victorian ideas about marriage and relationships were kind of the norm. And yet, in this book, we hear about Mary's mother openly sort of fraternizing with men who are not her husband. And I was really surprised by that. But to go back to my main point, is we have this profound neglect of this girl, right? She has not been taken care of at all. She doesn't even really know what affection is like because her parents have never shown her it. And the sort of inciting incident of this novel is that her parents die. Her parents die, and for one thing, she feels nothing when they die. But for another thing, she's so profoundly neglected that people don't even realize that there's a 10-year-old girl living in her parents' house who needs taking care of. And she was discovered basically by accident. And the reason that she was sort of forgotten about, part of the reason, was that she found a glass of wine in the house and drank it. And when a young child drinks enough alcohol, what happens to them? They basically fall asleep. So she just fell asleep when the house was being emptied out. And just the finding the alcohol and drinking it is bad enough, right? But people forgetting that there's a 10-year-old girl in this house, right? So you've got these themes overhanging it of child neglect. You've got adultery, it seems like, happening as a very little part of the plot. But then also themes of loss really hang over this novel. So what happens after Mary's parents die is when she's found, she is taken to live with her uncle, who is usually referred to as Mr. Craven, which is an unfortunate last name, but her uncle named Mr. Craven, and he lives in this big mansion in Yorkshire, in northern England. And she goes to live at this mansion, and she finds out very quickly that in the sort of gardens outside the mansion, there is one particular garden that is walled off, that has not been opened for 10 years. And the reason that it is walled off, that it's closed, that it hasn't been opened in 10 years, is because it was the garden of Mr. Craven's wife, whom he loved deeply. And he hasn't opened it because she died 10 years ago, and he just couldn't bear to go near it because it would resurrect all these feelings toward her in him. So we have this theme of loss hanging over this book as well. And there's another character where the theme of loss comes to play a big role in their journey as well. But I don't want to talk about that character because I don't want to spoil too much. This isn't a book, this isn't a novel that is very plot driven, right? You're not like on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next. But I think it's good to go in with a little bit of mystery around what's going on here. And so, as maybe you've guessed by now, if you aren't familiar with the story, the secret garden of the title is, of course, that walled-off garden that no one has gone in for 10 years in the grounds of Mr. Craven's mansion. And Mary, at a certain point, discovers this garden. And she finds the key, totally by accident, the key that opens the door to the garden, totally by accident, and goes into it, and just kind of starts to tend to it. She's so overwhelmed by the beauty of it, even after having been neglected for 10 years, that she starts to want to take care of it. And I feel like what you see in Mary is she goes from this really spoiled, self-absorbed little girl. Like I said, she was totally emotionally neglected by her parents. She had little to no interest in other people, in other children, or in other adults, and she didn't really care about their well-being either. And I feel like what the garden does for her is, I think it kind of gives her something outside herself to care about, to tend to, and that kind of starts to help change her character, starts to get her to be more outgoing and less self-absorbed. And she also, of course, meets several characters. There are a lot of wonderful characters in this book, and I won't enumerate them all, but there's the maid at Mr. Craven's house. There's Dickon, who's the maid's brother, who becomes her close friend, and others. And so you see her kind of start to come out of her shell, start to care about other people. And it's really wonderful to see her just go from this self-absorbed, spoiled girl to probably still kind of spoiled girl, but much less self-absorbed and much more caring girl toward the end of this book. It really is lovely. And that's probably all I'll say about the book. I think what I'll leave you with is one really beautiful passage in the book. There are some moments of beautiful writing in The Secret Garden. It is well written, but the prose style isn't necessarily the first thing that leaps out. But there are these moments of just real beauty in the writing. There's one quote, before I read the long passage I want to read to you, there's one short little quote that I love, that the character Dickon, who I mentioned, speaks. And he says it in sort of a Yorkshire accent, which I'm going to butcher, but I'll say it anyway. It's such a beautiful quote. And he says of The Secret Garden, he says, "There'll be a fountain of roses here this summer." And I think that's just a lovely image, a fountain of roses, right? But my favorite passage in the book is from relatively late in the book. It does not spoil anything. The passage has nothing to do with the plot, so no worries on that front. But I want to read you this passage. For anyone curious, the chapters in the book do have titles, and this is the first paragraph of chapter 21, which is just called Ben Weatherstaff, who's one of the staff at the big mansion. So here's that. "One of the strange things about living in the world is that it is only now and then one is quite sure one is going to live forever and ever and ever. One knows it sometimes when one gets up at the tender solemn dawn time and goes out and stands alone and throws one's head far back and looks up and watches the pale sky slowly changing and flushing and marvelous unknown things happening until the east almost makes one cry out and one's heart stands still at the strange unchanging majesty of the rising sun, which has been happening every morning for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. One knows it then for a moment or so, and one knows it sometimes when one stands by oneself in a wood at sunset, and the mysterious deep gold stillness slanting through and under the branches seems to be saying slowly, again and again, something one cannot quite hear, however much one tries. Then sometimes the immense quiet of the dark blue at night, with millions of stars waiting and watching, makes one sure. And sometimes the sound of far-off music makes it true. And sometimes a look in someone's eyes. Just utterly beautiful, I think. And, you know, I read that, and I have felt that, personally. I felt something like that. When I've been out in nature, when I've been out, like, backpacking on a camping trip or something like that, or even just going for a walk in the Adirondack Mountains in New York or something, I feel like I have felt this. You know, it is so beautiful. And I'm glad I read that passage, because something it does bring out to me now that really I thought about while reading it was this book does feel almost like a proto-environmentalist story, because the story focuses so much on Mary tending to this garden, right? Taking care of nature. She makes friends with a robin in the book, which is such a lovely little part of the book. She becomes friends with a robin, and I love robins. I don't know why, but I love robins, so I just love that part of the book. But the story is about her taking care of nature, tending to, again, a garden. And it does feel like you could see that as proto-environmentalist. Like, we need to take care of nature, right? So that it can be enjoyed for its own sake, right? So they can be enjoyed for the sort of ecstatic beauty that we can get from it. And I think that's very environmentalist, I think. So that really leapt out to me as well. So, but I'll leave it at that. This will be a short video. I do recommend The Secret Garden if you are looking for something wholesome, and not as short as you would expect. It's actually a bit on the longer side. For a children's book, it's actually kind of long. It's about 300 pages in this edition. It's wide margins. But still, on the longer side for a work of children's literature, but still not long. You'll zip through it if you read it, and you'll have a lovely reading experience, I think. So, anyway, that's The Secret Garden. I'll leave it at that, and talk to you all again soon. Bye.